Hello, Susan. It's so good to have you on my show here today.
Hello, Heather. I'm so glad to be here.
We have Dr. Susan Harris Howell, who is this amazing researcher. She sounds like a little bit of a jack of all trades. So I'm not going to do you a service in introducing you, but it reminds me a little bit of myself, Susan, where we have a lot of interests and a lot of things that have pulled at us, and everything as an author to a speaker to now I'm understanding a novel. But we're going to have some fun conversation around some of our research, some of your research. And the only reason I'm saying our, I apologize, but I'm also a researcher, and I've just loved talking with other researchers because we love to get behind the scenes and figure out why things work. So I want to hand it over to you and just tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do, Susan.
Okay. I am a professor of psychology at Campbellsville University, which is in central Kentucky. And I have taught here now for, goodness, I guess about 29 years and teach psychology. Love what I do. I have spent years mentoring students, male and female students, and teaching a gender studies course. And so a lot of what I talk about with my students in class and out is how being male or female very often has an impact on us that we don't even realize. And so after having done this now for several years and going to conferences and speaking, I would have people say, well, have you ever written a book? And I would say, well, no, I never have. And then I'd go to another conference and they ask me the same thing. And after, I don't even know how many times I said, no, I really haven't. I'm busy with other things. One day I just stopped saying no. And I sat down and started outlining chapters. And so I did write Buried Talents, where I talk specifically about what I just said, how the ways that we are male or female impact us. And my approach is looking at the ways that are very subtle that we don't even realize. If somebody comes up to you and says, you can't do that, you're a woman, or you can't do that, you're a man, we immediately take issue with that and we argue the point. Or if we believe it's something that's illegal, we would like talk about, okay, we're going to have to call a lawyer or something. But those things we address. But when someone consistently is biased toward us and prejudiced toward us in ways that fly under our radar, we don't notice it. And so those things shape who we are in powerful ways. So that's what I've written the book about, are all of those very subtle ways.
Oh, I love it. And I'm dying to know so many subtle ways. But before I jump into that, I have to say, I love that you're talking about it, but I would say I actually got a message growing up that was not so subtle. I was born in the 70s, and I was definitely told there was so many things I could not do as a girl. And part of it too was also the religious community that I grew up in. Told me that I couldn't be a leader. I couldn't be up front. I couldn't speak. The funny thing, and even I had a PE teacher who, I think you probably read that in my book, who liked to ridicule me. And I was like, until this great coach came along and said, we can do something with this. She's smart. She may not be big and powerful, but she's smart. We can do something. So I actually grew up with some overt messaging that I got kind of used to, but it also made me a little feisty, saying, well, I'll show you.
Oh, I had some of those kind of messages too. And sad to say, I bought into a lot of them, but I didn't know I was even buying into the subtle, it was both. It's extra, or what's the word we just used?
Overt or covert.
Or covert. There were both. Yeah. I grew up in a church.
Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I grew up in a church like you, that they were very clear and overt in the message that women weren't supposed to pastor. They weren't supposed to preach. They weren't supposed to be a deacon. Anything that smacked of leadership, we weren't supposed to do. But I even remember, and I'm pretty sure, when you're a kid, sometimes you remember things that aren't 100% accurate. But I believe that this is an accurate memory, that women who sang a special in church couldn't sing it from behind the pulpit because that was too much like preaching. They had to stand over like next to the piano. And I remember hearing, though, that if you were a woman and you sang a duet or a trio or with a bigger group, and at least one of those group members was a man, then you could stand behind the pulpit.
That's so silly.
It was crazy. And so when I tell my students that, they're like, oh my gosh, no wonder you want to teach gender studies. This is important.
I thought that too. I thought
exactly.
that too. I've had that passion. And I think when you've been excluded and when it's been very overt, like it has been for you and I, doesn't it make you sensitive to, we will never exclude again. We will never discriminate. We will fight marginalization, and we'll do everything we can to not only inspire, to rise above it, but to inspire our world to participate in a more inclusive world, because the fact they got away with that is still shocking to me. And it's still happening in a lot of communities, particularly religious communities. And it still shocks me that we're here, 2023, and we're dealing with that. I have no context for it. But tell me about some of these subtle ways.
Well, for one thing, researchers have found that when a boy and a girl come home after doing well on a test that is very often associated with boys, like for instance, a math test or a science test, they found that if a boy and a girl come home and say, yay, I made an A on this test, parents are more likely to congratulate the boy, saying that we're really proud of you. You're so smart. You're very talented. You're gifted in this area. For their daughter, they're more likely to say, I'm proud of you. You worked really hard. And even though those are both compliments that communicate different things, there's a subtle message there that his success is likely to be repeated. Because if you're smart today, you're likely going to be smart tomorrow, next week, next year, in 10 years, whatever. But if you got that grade, not so much because you're smart, but because you worked for it, great. But next week, you might not have as much opportunity to study, or the teacher might be more difficult. Or if we play that out in adult ways, you might be having 5 children to take care of, or you might have a husband who needs you. So you're not going to be able to succeed as much in this thing that is a male domain. And so that's a very subtle message. And my students sometimes have a hard time with that. They'll say, well, but it's really good to be smart, and it's really good to be a hard worker. And of course it is, both. And the fact of it is any success is likely due to a combination of both, being smart and working hard. But the fact of it is, we compliment the boys on being smart and the girls on being hard workers. The message is, as a boy, you're going to continue to succeed. And as a girl, it's a little bit hit or miss. So when they get,
you're right, such subtlety.
And when they get to be adults, sometimes, let's just say you have that boy and girl growing up and they're both leaders, maybe even in a church situation, and something happens that's very difficult to handle, and he's successful with it and she is successful with it. The adult version of what I just said would be, well, he's obviously gifted and called, and she really has had to work hard to make this happen. That's a very different message than you're gifted and called. And whereas he's encouraged, it's very easy to see that she could be discouraged, thinking that it's so much work, maybe it's not worth it. So,
well, I'm giving myself a little bit of accolades as you're talking, because I have a boy and a girl.
Oh, okay.
And sometimes when you hear this advice, they're 18 and 20 now. So I'm like, oh my gosh, did I do it right? Did I do it right? And I'm like, oh, I did it right. Thank God.
That's
I
great.
did it right. My daughter is gone into the field of science, and my son has gone into the field of communications.
Wow, that is great.
Fascinating. Yeah,
it really is. Yeah, and you know what? That's interesting, because there are some wonderfully positive stories out there. When I was writing this in Buried Talents, I was remembering back to, I think I was probably a senior in high school. My grandparents happened to be visiting once when I brought home a report card. And my grandmother, who was not a liberated woman, I mean, she was born in 1904. She was very restricted in all that she could do. But I remember so clearly her looking, and I had made really good grades. And she said, Susan, does it come naturally to you or do you work really hard for it? And I remember thinking, and I said, it's some of both. I know learning is easier for me than it is some people in the class. But yeah, I do have to study and I have to work on, these homework assignments. And looking back now, it's nice that a woman who came through the world when she
Yes.
didn't assume that it was one or the other. She asked in all seriousness. So, does it come easy for you or not? And I remember thinking about it and telling her, some of both. English always came easier to me than, say, history. Music came fairly easy to me, and some other things didn't, And so it was nice for her to say that.
That is impressive. Way to go, Grandma.
Right.
We're proud of you. 1904.
That's right. That's right. Who knows what she could have done if she had been born 100 years later.
Oh, I know.
Yeah.
It makes me think of that line in Little Women where they were all gathered around her saying, "Oh my goodness, you're a really good writer. You could have been a writer. You could have been an attorney." And her one line always stuck with me. She goes, "I could have been a great many things." That's all she says in the movie. And it even sticks with me to this day where in that era, I mean, women couldn't even really sign their name. They'd used a synonym or a male sounding name in order to sell books.
Right. Exactly.
But feeling that glass ceiling on her and saying, I could have been a great many things.
Right.
Having to deal with the world that she was born into.
Yeah.
It makes me very grateful that I'm born into this era.
I know, it really is. And like you, when I started reading that research, I thought, well, did I do it well? And I believe I did. I don't think I fell into that with my children. But yeah, that's the first thing a lot of people tell me, especially if they have children. It's like, oh my gosh, did I do it? And so that is nice to know that sometimes intuitively we do get it right.
Yes.
And that's one thing I try to bring out in the book is that even though there are so many subtle ways, there are a lot of subtle ways that parents are doing it right. And so I try to make the book more about, let's see what we're doing, see how we can improve. And at the same time, let's not spend too much time blaming ourselves when we have erred. And let's don't blame our parents and grandparents. Most parents do the best that they can, knowing what they know. And no child comes with a manual. And so I try to gear away from that in the book because I don't want it to become about complaining about what was done wrong to us as much as it is. Let's just find out what those things are and then see what we can do to fix them for the next generation.
Right. And even in my case, my parents evolved. They started seeing the inequity and they started seeing they were raising a very strong daughter. They realized she's got the gift of leadership here and we're telling her she can't. And even with my father being a pastor, he stepped away from all of that and said, nope, I've changed all my theology. So to watch my father evolve in that and my parents evolve in that, and both of them have a change of heart. And I'm seeing that more and more too. I worked with another group and it was another pastor and his wife. And he readily admits, I used to believe that and I don't anymore.
Yeah, that's wonderful.
And I want these safe spaces and safe conversations to let people evolve because we're all evolving.
Exactly. We are. And something that I found is that I started teaching, like I said, about 29 years ago. And when I first started teaching, students were at a different place than they are now. I have a lot more open-mindedness in students. I don't get as much flack today when I teach gender studies as I did the first time I taught it, which would have been probably around maybe the mid 1990s, something like that. And so I don't get as much flack. Something that's interesting, though, and in the spirit of looking at the subtle ways, what I have found is that even students who are on board with equality and will even be able to say, my parents did this right and they did this right, and they tell me you can be anything you want and that sort of thing. Sadly, what I still see is that they will still worry, at least the girls will worry about, how can I do all the things that I want to do, because I also want to have kids. And I have male students, and trust me, they have plenty of concerns too. It's not an easy road for anybody to just decide what they want to be when they grow up. But the boy students aren't worried about that. They never come in, literally never come in and say, I'm not sure if I can reach all my goals because one day I want to be a dad. They never say that. And so even among students who have grown up in very egalitarian households and don't buy into the biblical interpretation that leadership in women is wrong, even among them, they're still being held back by this idea that if I want to be a mom, I'm not going to be able to do these things. And if I want to be a dad, that doesn't seem to faze them at all. So I know that was part of why I wrote my book, was because even among people who are on board with the theology that supports women and men following their call, there's still so many things that hold the woman back.
Well, and I think, I work a lot with this with women in advancement, and there is a difference, and correct me if I'm doing a subtle gender bias, please, but I have noticed that there is more of a desire for the woman to do the caretaking. And I think then what happens is they create a false belief that if I step out of the workforce, it makes me less than for when I step in. And part of my coaching is, you really can do whatever you want. If you want to work full-time, you can. If you want to stay home, you can. If you want to do a hybrid, you can.
Yeah.
Whatever you want to do, it's not going to cost you later on in life.
Yeah.
And I think that's the false belief. And I've seen it both ways. The very hard working career woman who's afraid to stop, but really wants to and is missing her kids. And the hard, the stay-at-home mom who feels like, well, I'm already out of the game, I can't re-enter.
Right.
Really try and push on those false beliefs is what I call them, because I think that's society has given us that, don't you?
Yeah, I think so too. And I think some of it depends though on what sort of a career you're wanting and what you're going for. I think there are some fields that stepping out for 5 to 10 years to be at home could make a drastic difference. And then there's some where it's not going to, but I think there is kind of like almost an all or nothing mentality. And it's probably not all or nothing. It probably depends on a host of things, like what career are you, what's your end goal going to be? Do you want to be a CEO, or are you wanting to write the great American novel? Or, there's a difference. And so, I think that it's important to think in terms of what do they want to do? And are they talking about being out for a year or two? Are they talking about being out for 10 or 15? There's a big variation, I think, there. So.
Right. And what really is holding them back? Is it really, is it society or society's perceptions? And I want to say, we don't have to give it that much power. We get to actually chart our own course and hold our head high. And even one of the true beliefs I work a lot with women is, oh, I'm better because I was a mother.
Yes.
I'm re-entering the workforce now. You want me because what I learned in maybe 10 years of pulling out and mothering or anything like that. That's really not a popular belief that I see them repeating this false belief about their own personal identity, regardless of what they choose. And it goes back to, I love what you said. It really goes back to saying, let me first start with what you want. Yeah. Then you get to create the beliefs around that, not the other way around. You don't live your life according to what perceived beliefs are out there.
Right. Yeah. And I think that at least sounds to me when I read your book, that, what that person's goals are. I mean, is so pivotal to what they want to do. And I know that whenever I talk to students, I think the thing that discourages me so much is that whether or not those women students are going for something where it will hurt them if they take that time off, or if their end goal is something that won't hurt them if they take that time. The issue I have is that the men students don't even have to weigh it. They don't have to say, well, wait a minute, this is my goal. Can I do it or not? Is having children expedient or not? Is it going to get me off course? I have never once in almost 30 years of teaching had a young man come into my office and be stressed about whether or not having kids was going to interrupt his. And in fact, what I think even is that it almost has the opposite effect. If a young student, female student comes to me and says, I want to have children, the very first thing she thinks is, I better step back and rethink graduate school, or I need to rethink that first job or whatever. But whenever a guy is thinking that, my girlfriend and I want to have children right away, and, my wife, we just found out she's pregnant, whatever, it motivates him to go out and get that better job because he's thinking in terms of supporting her. So when you add the element of, I want to get married in the next 6 months or a year, or I want to have a baby in the next year or two, it seems to have the opposite effect on the young man and the young woman. He seems to speed up his career goals because he's thinking that's going to pay off for everyone. She is backing away from career goals, thinking that if she pursues them, it's going to hurt people. And that's another thing I bring up in the book, is that the subtle message we give to men is that you being all you can be in your career will help everyone. It's going to be a source of status and money and a quality of life for you, your spouse, and your children. And we give the message to women that if you go for it, he's going to have to make sacrifices. Your children won't be as well raised. And so you're going to be exacting a price out of people. And do you really want to do that? And so we give a different message to men and women, boys and girls.
That's so true. I'm thinking back when my kids were younger, going back to that question of what do you want? My husband and I stayed away from a lot of the gender bias stuff just because of the way we wired, to be honest.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
And our commitment to equality and egalitarianism. Yeah. But, I remember saying, I really want to work, and the kids were 3 and 5. And so I became the breadwinner, and he's like, I really want to stay home. I love that he felt that permission to do that. And we did that for a couple of years. And I can still remember, Susan, I was sitting in a faculty meeting and I'm going, I got the cutest little 5-year-old and 7-year-old at home. These are like 2 hours I cannot get back out of my life. I remember it so clearly. And I'm like, I'm resigning tomorrow. And I went home and I said, let's switch. I want to stay home now. You go to work. And he did. And we did. And it worked out even better because
that's great.
You're focusing not on what's expected of you, but more of like, what do we want in that moment? And pivoting over a little bit to the marriage, I think this is where I'm surprised at some of the biases that both genders bring into the marriage. And they don't flush it out so that it stays almost like as a little harasser in the marriage where it kind of dictates why they're making decisions, when I want to just keep going, well, let's just take all male or female gender biases off the table, and let's just ask each other, we're two human beings, what do we want to do in life? We get to craft it. And that, I was surprised still, whether it's religious circles or not, there's still some kind of boundaries and barriers for humans to explore that and to feel like they're allowed to push on that boundary and say, I think I do want to work full time. Okay, I've done it for 5 years now. I think I want to stay home. How about you go be the breadwinner? There's
that's
not that ease of conversation.
That is so wonderful that both of you felt free to do it one way and then to switch that because that very often doesn't happen. My husband stayed home with our daughter for the first few months of her life. I stayed home with our son for the first few months of his life. And we used to joke that if we ever have a third, one of the kids was going to have to drop out of elementary school and stay with it, And so we never did.
Yeah.
But we felt free to do that, you know. And to be honest, it was a little easier for us because we had jobs where we had that flexibility. And I'm very well aware that not everyone has that. And so I don't mean to say, well, I did it, everybody could, because I know we did have flexible jobs. But the important thing, I believe, is within whatever your goals are, we probably have a whole lot more flexibility than we think. And I think it's important that we realize that and then try our best. Like you said, forget for a minute that you're a man or a woman or whatever, and just what do you want to do? What do you feel gifted? What is your passion? What do you want to do?
Yep. And those kids snuck up on me. I thought I'd always want to work. And I was made that very clear with my husband. I will work because I love it. And I will not be one of those women that just step back, you know. Boy, did I ever step back. I was like, he's having way too much fun and they look like they're having a blast. And this priority is no longer my priority. And I'm going to give myself the permission to change my priority and step away from the workforce and have the confidence. And I will say it was wobbly stepping back in because you're like, oh, I've been dealing with naps and goldfish crackers and park dates. Do I know what I'm doing again as a researcher and as an educator? And, you know, learning how, but then and that's why I coach women on it quite a bit. Are you kidding? It pivoted me over into open my own coaching company. And I believe it's my parenting, my time out a little bit in parenting that allowed me to really develop the coaching presence and voice that I want. I didn't even return to academia. I decided I was, you know, wanted a different course. And I think that's that fear that they have to return to something maybe they stepped away from 5 or 10 or 15 years ago. And I go, you probably won't even want it again, or maybe you will, maybe you won't. Who knows? Don't make everything align for that. And that's why we're making decisions.
And one thing I think too, is that we need to be training the people who do the hiring, that these women or men either that have spent time parenting and which is a whole lot, as you know, conflict resolution and helping to find a way to help these children make good decisions and being able to navigate, you know, and predict what they're going to need before they need it. All of those are wonderful working world qualities that you could go with those qualities into a number of different fields and be really good. And so if we could train the employers that this man or woman that sat out for a few years with their children, they've got some wonderful skills. And sometimes I think the employers aren't quite ready to see that. And so that's another thing, is that I'm hoping people will read Buried Talents, even if you personally have never felt discriminated against. Even if you're not raising children, there are some powerful messages in this book for people who are out there in church leadership, mentoring new ministers. Or if you are in your company and you are the one who is in charge of doing the hiring and the firing and all of that, for you to realize some of your own biases that would help if you could work around those.
Yes. Yeah, I do a lot of work with corporate America, leadership coaching. What are you seeing? Any trends that you're seeing in corporate America and any gender biases? I know it's a hot topic, and I know it's really been pushed to the front burner. I'm surprised that I still see the glass ceilings as much as I do.
Oh, right. Yeah. And, you know, that is not an area I know a lot about, but I do know, again, from researching Buried Talents, that one of the things that women say consistently is that they feel like they have a double standard that men don't have to live up to. That, for instance, if they are very assertive, make good decisions, can address conflict and be tough and make those decisions that sometimes are difficult to make, people think that they're not feminine enough. And so if they try then to be nurturing and they try to be cooperative and pulling in all of those more communal qualities, then people say they're too soft to lead. And so when I was reading through this research, one of the things I thought was, well, how about a blend of the two?
Mm-hmm.
And I was really surprised that I thought that would be the answer. And then I kept reading in this very same article, and they said, whereas most people, a lot of people think if you just have a blending of the two, that that's not the answer either, because there's some research that when a woman tries to do that, they take the fact that she's doing both to mean that she's not quite as genuine. And that if she is soft here, but strong there, she seems feminine here, but she seems very assertive and agentic there, that they almost take that as that she's being two-faced. And that if she is, that works against them seeing her as a leader. And so I thought, well, then what is she supposed to do? And what the research I read said that the problem is that no matter if there's a way around this or not, it still goes back to the fact that men don't have to deal with that at all. That being a tough man and a good leader are seen as being basically the same skill set. But being a good woman and a good leader, even though what I firmly believe is that that can be the same skill set, but very often people don't believe it is. And it's their perception of that woman who is their boss, their manager, their director, that can very often be a problem for her progressing. And so that was one thing that and I remember when I read the research on that, just feeling like, well, this is a no-win, you know, and men don't have that. So that's really unfortunate.
Oh, you're right. You're so right. And I've seen it. I've experienced it, but I've also realized one of the things I tell myself, and I coach women in this as well, is like, you're both. You're strong and you're sensitive, unapologetically.
Exactly.
You're just both.
Exactly. And I want to be both.
Right. And don't let anyone pull you apart, and don't give into that pressure being pulled apart. I think I write about it in my book of Holding Tensions. You get to be both. And
absolutely,
I have a very strong presence, but don't mistake me for being unkind or insensitive. I also have a very sensitive and kind depth side. So I'm going to try and hold both at all times, but I'm not going to apologize for the strength in my voice if I need it. I'm not going to apologize for the sensitivity in my voice if I need it, or that is my authentic self.
Right.
And I do think that's a little bit more, I don't know if that's more of the world. I don't know if that's more corporate America, but we kind of have we don't like holding tensions, one. And then two, we have this one idea in our head of what we're looking for as a leader.
Right.
And if they don't fit that mold, it makes people feel a little nervous. So it's almost like we have to market and brand ourselves. And that's what I coach people to do. Just saying, they're going to be surprised by you, and it's okay. Don't shrink. Don't let yourself go underground. Don't doubt yourself. Just recognize you're breaking the mold and hold your head up high and let the uncomfortableness be uncomfortable for a little bit. And then pretty soon they're going to love you because you are authentic and you're real and you're not afraid to be both.
And you know what I think sometimes is that if women could do that, and of course men too do that, and then if we could just train workers and CEOs and, you know, the people at all levels, that this is reality, then we would go further. You know, if like you said, that perception. And so I think we do kind of have to work on it both ends, work on it within ourselves and give ourselves. And I love that chapter, by the way, on the, you know, having both of the, how did you word the tension?
Oh, holding tensions. Yeah.
I love that chapter. And I think for each of us as individuals to realize we can do that. But then I think we also have got to take very seriously to train people in business and in churches and goodness, in families and in all sorts of areas, that this is, like you said, this is authentic. And if your boss seems to be able to give you a whole lot of nurturing when you need it and be tough when you need it, that doesn't mean they're less than authentic. It means that, guess what? That's probably a very well-rounded human being who is leading you. And isn't that what we want? So I think there's probably a lot of education, like you say, with the individual that you're coaching and with these companies that might be still back in the 1950s, you know, mentally where they think that we are. And we've thankfully progressed past that. But I do think that there's a lot in corporate America that maybe has not progressed past that. So
Yeah, Sheryl Sandberg or Sanders, I think it's Sandberg, talks about it in her book Lean In, and
right.
talks a lot about that, and is very vocal about the not covert but very overt behavior of corporate America, and how
Right.
it's blocking women from advancing. And
Sure.
she's gotten very vocal about that, and I think she's done a great job kind of opening that doorway and that portal for us to talk about it in a safe way, but to really talk about an issue that
Right.
I see as a coach. And I see one of the things, and let me know if this showed up in your research, but I see a woman will say something maybe 3 times and a man will say something once and they get heard.
Right.
Or the man repeats what the woman said the 3rd time and somehow he gets the credit for it. Is that
Exactly.
showing up
Yeah.
in your research too?
Yeah, yeah, and a lot of that in the language chapter, where some of the research shows that men feel more confident in what they believe and their right to state what they believe. And women, even when women are confident, sometimes we communicate that we're not. And there is some research that shows that women sometimes aren't lacking confidence, but we are using language that sounds like we're not confident. Like, for instance, women are more likely to say something like, I'm thinking we should probably meet again, maybe Tuesday of next week. And then that even just that lilt at the end of the sentence sounds like a question, like you're not really sure if we need to meet again at all. Whereas a man's more likely to say, okay, so we'll meet next Tuesday at 4.
Oh, I
Now,
see. Yes.
which one of them sounds like they know for sure we need to meet next Tuesday at 4? And which one sounds like they're not sure and that it's up for debate? And one of the things that I talk about in the book is that if you have a couple, a married man and woman, and they're trying to make a decision about whether or not they should take these new job opportunities, he's more likely to say, it's going to be a whole lot of extra work and I won't have as much time at home, but it'll be great for my career. I want to take the job. She's more likely to say, well, I'm thinking it might mean more hours and might mean that, I can't be at home as much. What do you think I should do? And there's no evidence that they have different feelings inside as to whether they want to take that job or not. But of those two, if they're only going to move for one of their jobs, who do you think they'll move for?
Yeah.
They'll move for the one who sounds like he knows exactly what he wants.
Yeah.
And so I think some of it is, and I tell my students whenever we talk about this in class, is we need to think about how we're speaking. And if we're confident, sound confident. And if you really aren't confident, then don't sound confident. There's no crime in not sounding confident if you're not confident. But if you are, there's no crime in saying, this is what I need. This is what I want. So I tell my students that, and they always get real wound up and they're all going to do it. And they'll come back the next class and I'll say, well, how did it go? And one girl told me that she had tried so hard for several days with her boyfriend. If he said, what do you want to eat? She would say, I want Mexican. And instead of saying, I don't know, maybe Mexican, that sounds very different. And so she said he was, congratulating me on this. And she said, after a day or two, I found myself sneaking back into well, what do you want to do? And he would say, well, I don't know. Do you want Chinese? Well, I don't know. Maybe. Do you want? And he'd say, no. I want to know, what do you want for dinner? And so they would come in and they'd say, we did it for a while, but it was so hard. And I didn't even realize. And I tell them, that's why it's subtle. If this were easy, we wouldn't even be in the patterns that we're in now.
Oh, well said.
So if I'm finding this in 18 and 19 and 20-year-old students, you can imagine how ingrained it is in that employer or employee. And they're talking about, for instance, a raise or a promotion or a new assignment that might really help them in terms of building up their skill set. For that one employee to say, yeah, I'd love to do it. And for the other one to say, I'm thinking I might like that.
Mm.
Makes a difference.
Huge difference. You're right. How we have to take responsibility for the confidence and the level of confidence that we portray and we engage our world in. One of the things I notice quite a bit too is the tendency for women when they lead, they want that collaborative spirit in the room. And
Mm-hmm.
oftentimes males will challenge her and she then gets offended. I've really coached him quite a bit of saying it's the rules of engagement. It's fair play. He
Uh-huh.
literally wants to see, are you up for the task? It's not
Uh-huh.
disrespectful. You're perceiving it as disrespectful because it's not the way a lot of women will work with one another, which is, well, I don't know. Do you want Mexican? Well, maybe. But was
Yeah.
thinking about that Chinese. I mean, we'll talk about it for 10 minutes until we
Exactly.
decide together.
Exactly. Yeah.
So how you engage with rules of engagement can vary sometimes in corporate America or in the home or with your
Mm-hmm.
girlfriends versus with, maybe
Right.
5 male colleagues. You've got to be aware of the shifting dynamics and what
Yes.
they need for their own sake and their own clarity, because they don't want to collaborate. They want to know, do you want Mexican or Chinese? They want to know, are you going to get the project done? And is it going to be on time? That's all they're
Exactly.
thinking about. And
That's
that's
it.
fair.
It is
So,
fair, yeah. And it's fair if the deadline is reasonable or not. It's
mhm,
fair to say that. And so
yes.
I think that sometimes I think it's like we've said, it goes to the individual. And I think what I'm trying to do with these students is help them to at least be aware of it, first of all,
Mhm,
and then take some steps toward changing it. And they do that and they come in and they fuss about how it was more difficult than they thought. But I think that all of that hopefully will translate when they're out there in the quote unquote real world and they're in a job interview or they're bargaining about a job like a promotion or
mhm,
raise or what their salary will be starting in. I think that all of that, and so that's one thing that I really want to emphasize to my students is that what you're learning in this class is going to be something you will use every day of your life,
mhm,
whether it's in your home or at work, and certainly at church and
mhm,
raising your children, even sitting around the Thanksgiving table with your aunts and uncles.
mhm,
this is these are everyday life skills. And so that
mhm,
was one reason it was important for me to write the book, was that there were so many people who, when I would speak at a conference or teach
mhm,
it in class, whether we were talking 18-year-olds or 40-year-olds at a conference, so
mhm,
many people, it had just gone outside of their notice. They just
mhm,
did not notice it. And so it was fun, to tell you the truth, to open their eyes to
mhm.
that and help them to start thinking about how they speak and how they interact and so
Mhm.
on.
We had a similar experience with my son. I think he was around 6th grade, and talk about opening your eyes, but it was on the other end of the spectrum. He didn't understand. He had never heard of any kind of discrimination against women. So we were talking, and there was an episode that was happening in our community, and he couldn't wrap his brain around it. He goes, "Why wouldn't they hire her?" And my husband and I were like, well, because blah, 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 blah. We're
Yeah,
going
yeah,
down. And he was so shocked. He'd never heard of
yeah.
making a decision like that. And honestly, I was like, oh, I'm taking the points where I could get him as a parent. I took a point there because I go, first of all, I never wanted my baggage to become part of it in
Yes,
the family. And then second of all, I just wanted us to we're 4 human beings. We're
yes,
not necessarily man, woman, girl, boy. We are 4 human beings trying to figure out what we want and what we're made to do and trying to step into the life that we're really creatively made for. And there's
right.
always going to be oppositions.
Yes,
And
yeah,
it'll be maybe based on gender, maybe based on something else. But
right. Yeah,
there will always be opposition and barriers in our life. None of it gets to keep us stuck. And
right.
none of it gets to have that much of our attention. We get
Yeah,
to say, that we don't engage. We just
that's
don't
right.
engage. We move on because there's plenty of places in this world that are committed to equality. They may not know
Right,
how to do it all well, but I'm like, I don't care as long as you're open. We're all learning
right,
together. I'm not going
right.
to judge you for it. There's stuff
Yeah,
that people have opened my eyes up to, and I'm so grateful when they've done it
yeah,
with grace and mercy and kindness and love and not judgment or
right.
accusation.
Right.
So that's what I'm committed to. And I see so many people committing to that and wanting that. And as soon as it's made available to them, you
Yeah.
see them shift in their thinking.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. That's so exciting too, isn't it?
Oh, it
When I
is.
have students who come in later and they'll say, and this happens so much. I usually teach gender studies in the fall semester, and so they'll come in after Thanksgiving, or anytime they've been at home, and they'll say, "Oh, you won't believe what we talked about." And I'm thinking, "Oh, I bet I will believe." So they tell me about things that their grandparent or a cousin or their parents or even their own siblings who look at things differently than they do, and they're absolutely surprised at how much was right there that they weren't noticing.
Right.
And they'll say often to me, I would have looked at it that way too before this class.
Yeah.
And so that's really exciting when you can start to see that there are some areas where changes are happening. It's so exciting.
It is. It is happening. And even my husband, I overheard a conversation with him teaching my son, and he taught him the word misogyny.
Yeah.
And that was the first time he heard it. But my son, very bright and loves big words, he was on his gaming headset, and I heard him say to his buddy, "I'm sorry, but I can't hear you over all the misogyny." It was
That's
the
great.
funniest line. I asked him later, I go, "What was that all about?" And he goes, "Oh, he was going on and on about how this girl couldn't do it, and she was a girl, and she was a woman, and they could." And he goes, "I'm sorry, but I can't hear you over all that misogyny." So he's like, "I'm going to try out my new word that Dad just taught me."
That's great. I like that line. That's great.
And I think even just that responsibility for us to not necessarily focus on the misogyny, not necessarily focus on the activity, but really focus on the humanity and the dedication, the commitment we have to see each person live to their fullest potential and not being a part of being the block of it. Yeah. And making sure that we're keeping those lines of communication open and we're building that trust there.
Yeah. Yeah. It's important.
Well, you're doing something else new here. I want to talk to you about that. You've got a new project.
I do.
And I'm so intrigued with it because I too am an author, and all I've written really is self-help books. You are writing a new book. Tell us about it.
Well, you're talking about the novel, right?
Yes, I am.
Yes,
different genre.
I am. I had a fabulous experience a few years ago where a student of mine, we were talking about something we thought would make a great book. And this student of mine was also an English along with psychology major. And he's a good writer. In fact, he's probably as good of a writer as I am. And I said to him, I said, this would make a great book. Why don't you write it? And he said, I don't have the time to write it, because he was engaged and about to graduate and everything. He said, why don't you write it? And I said, well, because I don't write fiction. I said, you write fiction. I don't write fiction. And he looked at me and he said, have you ever tried? And I said, no. He said, well, then we don't really know you can't do it, do we?
And the student became the teacher.
I know. And I thought, don't you hate it when they've been taught well?
Oh, I know. People quote my book back to me, and I'm like, I said that? Darn it. They caught me.
I know. Exactly. Yeah. How dare they read what we write? So I laughed about it. But then I thought, why not? And I may not be able to do this, but I'm going to give it a try. And I did give it a try. It took forever before I let a friend, read a few chapters, and just fell in love with the whole fiction writing process and the characters that we're developing. And so, yeah, I do. I have a novel that it's not out there yet, but fingers crossed it will be.
So. I'll be one of your buyers. I can't wait. I can't wait, because I need a good novel. I'd have stacks and stacks of all my thought processing books and thought leader books, but man, I need a good story. And I wish I have so much to say that I find myself still writing self-help books, but I wonder one day, maybe I'll put it in a story. And I played a little bit with that allegory I told you earlier, because I think story is so powerful. And I used an allegory throughout my book just to help people latch onto it. And they'll get on the line with me now. And they're like, I need help getting on my tire swing today, Heather. I'm carrying too many bracelets today, Heather. They'll say all these things to me, and I go, I know exactly what you mean. And we both have our language now because of that allegory. But
yeah, right. That is, I love the whole bracelet analogy. And I know exactly what the bracelets are for me. And I am here to tell you that I am taking some of those bracelets off.
Oh,
I
good. Do you
am
mind
just
sharing?
absolutely. Well, I have, I think part for me is that there are so many things that I want to do, and then I take on too much and try so hard to do it all because to be honest, I want to do all of these things, and the whole idea of clarity. And I think that is where I have just lost a little bit of that, and I've got to get that back. And so I am determined with this fresh new year that that is what I'm going to do, is to learn to say no. That is a big thing. I've got to be able to say no so that I can focus on that clarity and the things that I know that I'm called to do and that I know that I want to do.
Yeah.
And if I say no and people don't like that, then I guess that's got to be okay.
Yes.
It's just got to be okay. But did you notice how I said that just now? I said, I guess that's got to be okay.
I was getting ready to assert, Susan. I was getting ready to jump right in there for you.
And what I should do instead is to say, I've got to learn to say no.
Yes.
And just leave it at that.
Yeah. I had a friend who told me long ago, no is a complete sentence. And I loved that. I never forgot that. Right. And learning how to go, no, that's not going to work for me. Being able to say it that firmly. Yes. I know it shocks people and it throws people, but I've had to learn how to be comfortable with the uncomfortable, because saying no to bad things, I don't mean to make it too black and white, but things that you don't want to do, that's easy. Yes. As you become more successful and your life begins to grow, that's why I use the word the bracelets. Bracelets are neither good nor bad. It's just you can have so many that the very things that you are saying yes to is weighing you down to doing what you really love. And getting back on that tire swing is what I call active rest, and the under the stars is restorative is contemplative rest.
Right.
Both of them are forms of restorative rest. And so the thing that I want to keep empowering people to do is, like, we can take on and take off and put on as many bracelets as we want. It literally is up to us, particularly those of us who live in America. I just go, we really don't have any excuses. We get to address and create the life we want. I'm not going to say it's always going to be easy.
Sure.
But you don't get to wear these bracelets and keep blaming other people.
Right.
You have the power to take off the bracelets. You have the power to put on one. And that's even why I love the story of, like, she loved the bracelet initially because it kind of gave her that identity.
Sure.
And then she got hooked on it. She gave more and more bracelets, got more bracelets, and gave more to herself. And began to realize, who am I without my bracelets? I mean, is that not just midlife crisis right there?
Right there. Yeah, I know. And I think that I know for myself, I have gotten so busy over the last several years. And of course, in addition to everything, throw in a worldwide pandemic, and it just got even crazier. And I really do have to, the whole idea of restorative rest, I've got to just take that more seriously this year. And so that was another thing that I got, is that, even when you're doing things you love to do, it can be too much if you're not giving yourself chance for that restorative rest. So I'm working on that too. So yeah, I am, I'm a work in progress.
Way to go, Susan. I'm so excited for you. Well, as we wrap up, one of the questions I'd love to ask is, what is your morning ritual?
You know what I do is I have a tendency to want to start off doing, like, starting my day minute one, but I don't do that. I give myself a chance to sit and do something that is just kind of restorative again and relaxing, and helps me to focus and get prepared for the day. And when I do that, the rest of my day is a whole lot clearer. I have that clarity, that you talked about. And so that's what I do. And it is really important. It's really important to me that I have that, because on days that I don't, my day doesn't go as well. I don't feel as centered. I don't feel as grounded.
Oh, yeah. I believe how we start our days makes all the difference. And sometimes we have 5 minutes and sometimes we have 5 hours. I never know which it is, but how we create some intentionality around that and
Right.
give yourself that intentionality to start your day well makes all the
Right.
difference.
Whenever I am doing it well, typically that time is something that is restorative to me physically and spiritually and mentally.
Yes.
And ideally that is what that is for me. And like you said, some days I don't have as much time. And so I have to, okay, like which one is going to go today?
Yeah.
Or could I work in each of those in smaller segments? But I know that on days that I feel the best, that I start out grounded spiritually and mentally and then physically as well. And so those are the best days.
Yes. Don't you wish we could just do that every day? I don't know why we skip it. We just think we can skip it sometimes, don't we?
I know we do. And it's difficult. But I liked what you said in your book about, and I think you said just now, it might be 5 minutes, but it could be a few hours depending on the day and what you've got going on. And then there's some days where I don't feel like I need as much in any of those areas. And other days I feel like I need a lot more in all. And so yeah. So it varies, but days that are the best, I've addressed all three before I really hit the ground running on whatever my job is for that day.
Oh, I love that. Love that. Yeah. Well, what's some lasting advice or encouragement you want to give our listeners?
Well, I guess, of course, read my book. That would be such a wonderful thing. But actually, yeah, I think that one thing that I have become more and more aware of is being very intentional. What Varied Talents gives the message. You have to be intentional about noticing things that aren't always so overt. And because those things are very powerful. In fact, I would argue more powerful because we don't pay attention. And so I guess that's it. It's just to be more intentional and put some thought and some focus on those sort of areas of our life that are still important but go unnoticed.
I love it. Well, it's been such a pleasure having you. I feel like we could talk for several hours.
It's been fun. It's been great. I've appreciated it too.
Oh, well, thank you for your time, Susan. And we are looking forward to starting out 2023. So listeners, we are here for you. We are cheering you on and we are standing with you as you go after the life that you are made for. Right, Susan?
Yes. And could I also say that I would love for people to check out SusanHarrisHowell.com because they can, from my website, look for my ways to contact me and my social media and just learn more about Varied Talents. You can order from that website as well. And so I would love to hear from you as well. People who read the book, I absolutely am thrilled when they get back with me and say, oh, I love this, or that's a part that meant something to me. That's really nice for me. So I would just love to hear from people.
Oh, that's nice for every author, isn't it? Even the fact that you jumped on the line right before we started and said, I read your book and I loved it. And I go, really? Tell me more.
I know.
Oh, stop. No, don't stop. No.
People don't realize how important it is to a writer when we put so much into this. For somebody to write and say, oh, I loved in chapter 2 where you say, blah, 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 this is what I'm working on. That's enough to keep us going forever. So I really enjoy those emails that I get from people.
Good. So we'll have all that information in the show notes on the podcast, and you can find her book on Amazon.
Yes.
Everywhere.
And on my website.
And on your website. Perfect.
Yes, absolutely.
All right. Thank you, Susan. So fun having you today. Take care, everyone.
It's been great. Thanks.
Thanks for joining us today. We'd love a review. Helps us out quite a bit. Wherever you are, just drop a review. And you can find out more at heatherpenny.com. Cheering you on.